Today's lesson is on how to read a textbook. Why do we need to learn how to read nonfiction? Nonfiction reading is an important part of your learning for the next several years. 60% of what you're going to read in junior high will be nonfiction reading. Nonfiction reading is an important part of high school as well. It'll increase to 75% as you get into high school. If you decide to take AP classes, you'll probably have an even higher percentage of nonfiction reading that you'll have to complete. Now, nonfiction reading is also important in adulthood. If you choose to do college, there'll be a lot of nonfiction reading. Also in adulthood, you'll have to learn to read legal documents, directions for completing your taxes, reading related to your job. If you read the news, those are all types of nonfiction reading that you're going to have to do. So let's look at nonfiction versus fiction. So reading nonfiction requires a different set of skills. The writing on the left is fiction. The one on the right is from your social studies textbook. In fiction, the purpose is to entertain you. As a reader, you need to identify characters and how they fit into the plot. You have to understand how the setting and word choice create the tone and mood of the story. You need to follow the dialogue so you can understand what's happening between the characters. Nonfiction is about giving facts and information. It has a different structure than fiction. If you have ever said a textbook is boring, it's because you're reading it wrong. It was never meant to entertain you. The purpose of nonfiction text is to give you information. So let's look at some of the parts of a nonfiction textbook. We're going to use a page from our textbook to look at some different parts or structures of the nonfiction text and talk about their purpose. So the first part we're going to look at are pictures. Most nonfiction textbooks have pictures that you can look at. So if we look at this page, our first page here, we can see that there are some pictures here at the top. So we know that whatever we're going to read about is going to have something to do with Mona Lisa, maybe something to do with a compass or some maps, probably something to do with gold. So these pictures kind of give you a visual clue of what the reading is going to be about. So always pay attention to the pictures. So our next part is the headings. Headings give you a clue about what the topic of the entire lesson is going to be about. So in this case, it's going to be a changing world. That's going to be our heading. So once you see a heading, you need to ask yourself a whole bunch of questions about that heading. What kind of changing world? Who's changing world? What's changing in the world? All of those questions will help guide your reading as you go through the chapter. So our next part, the essential questions. So the essential and guiding questions are what you should be able to answer by the time you finish reading the section. They're there to help guide your reading. And on this page, we have a couple. One is, how do new ideas change the way people live? And the other one is, where did the Renaissance take place? So we know that this chapter, this lesson is going to have something to do with those two ideas or those two questions. So you should be able to answer those by the time you finish reading. Next part, we're going to look at the It Matters Because section. This is there to give you a brief overview of why the information is important. So this helps guide your reading. Europe was aware of the riches of Asia and Africa. Attempts to increase trade with these lands eventually developed into an era of European exploration that reached far beyond Europe's borders. So now we're starting to understand how this ties into that heading, a changing world. We know the world's going to change because of trade and exploration. So now we know what kind of things to look for as we read. The next part, titles. The title is the topic that all of the paragraphs underneath of it are about. For example, if we look at this title, New Ideas in New Nations, there are 3 paragraphs underneath that. Each of those paragraphs are going to have something to do with new ideas in new nations. So like we did with the heading, you're going to ask yourself some questions. What new ideas? What new nations? Tie it into the heading. How are new ideas in a new nation going to lead to a changing world? The next part, paragraphs. Those paragraphs are there for a reason. Each one of those paragraphs tell you something important about the title. So as you read the paragraph, see if you can write a sentence that explains what that paragraph was about. and how it ties into those titles, new ideas and new nations. How does it tie into the heading of a changing world? So keep that in mind as you read. As you keep reading, you're going to come across some other titles and other paragraphs. Constantly keep asking yourself those questions. What does this have to do with the information I read before? The purpose of all of these text structures in a nonfiction textbook is to help you know what you're reading before you ever get started. They're there to help you, so don't skip over those. Use those features. Constantly keep asking yourself, what is this telling me about the information that I need to know about? Good luck.